All right, so for reading today, boys and girls, we're going to talk about responding to the text. Now, whenever we were practicing, whenever we were reading from Room to Grow this week, we were practicing several things. We were practicing asking questions. We were practicing finding the author's purpose. We were practicing finding text structures, right? So we were doing it all with the same story. Now, today what we're going to talk about is responding to the text. So what that means is when we read stories, boys and girls, we need to get our minds thinking, just like we've been talking about all last week and this week. We need to visualize in our brains what's going on. And that's going to help us become a better learner, right? So what Miss Waldie is going to do is I'm going to read a different story from my book. And I'm going to show you what I mean by responding to the text, okay? And so when I say responding to the text, so I want to know what was the author's purpose? What was the text structure? What did you learn from the story, right? Now, when I say respond to the text, I don't want you to say, oh, that was a good story, right? Because that's not, I want a more in-depth response, right? I don't want you to just say the story was good, right? Because I want to know deeper. How did the author, what structure did the author use? Now, we learned yesterday that in Room to Grow, the author used sequencing, right, as the structure. The author used a lot of words like first, next, then, right? If you were in my small group, I don't know about if you're in Miss Misty's, but if you're in my small group, Miss Waldie made you circle those signal words, right? So you circled them throughout your book. So that's how you know the author was sequencing the story. Now, also, we learned that the author's purpose was either to inform us, right, to give us information about the culture, or to entertain us. This one kind of had two authors' purposes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a story about a little girl, and the title is called Faith Ringgold, Telling Stories Through Art. Okay, and then we're going to practice a response, and then you guys are going to go do your response on Room to Grow, okay? So remember, as Miss Waldie's reading, I want you to visualize in your mind what's going on, right? Create those mental images so you can understand the text better. A young African-American girl looked out her apartment window. Her Harlem street was a patchwork of colors and shapes. It reminded her of the brightly colored quilts her mother and grandmother made. Faith listened to the stories they told while quilting. She learned about the hard life of her great-great-grandmother as the needle went in and out of the quilt. Because her mother worked in fashion, there were always stacks of fabric on tables and chairs. Faith was often sick as a child, so she spent a lot of time indoors with her mother. Faith's mother taught her how to sew and to see art in the world around her. She treasured those days. Faith learned that art was a way to tell a story. She created paintings that told about events taking place in the world. Other paintings told stories from her own life and those of her family and friends. Faith often thought about the shapes and bold colors of her mother's many quilts. Could quilts tell stories too? Soon Faith began piecing together shapes of bright fabric to make pictures. Sometimes she would paint the fabric before cutting it into the shape she needed. She filled her story quilts with joyful images from her childhood. One quilt told about her family's picnics on their apartment roof in the summer. Later, she wrote a book called Tar Beach. She used the pictures from her quilt to tell the story. Today, Faith Ringgold is still using art to tell stories. Some stories tell of difficult times, but she never fails to bring joyful hope to all who see her work. Her painting and story quilts connect people to each other, to their communities, and to the world. All right, so we just read, this is a type of narrative nonfiction, because remember, that's the genre we're learning this week, right? This is a true story about someone's life and of a girl named Faith, right? And it was telling us how, you know, quilts are very important to her, and she uses her quilts to tell stories about things that happen in her life. And later on, as she got older, she ended up writing a book, right? And she used the quilt to help her write a book. And I think that's amazing, right? Now, if I was going to write a response to this, let me get my camera ready so I can. Can y'all see my board? Someone say yes or no, Miss Waldie.
Yes.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you. Now, let me fix it though. Now, the way we write a response, we can use sentence stems. Now, Miss Waldie, on our assignment, I gave those sentence stems to you so you can see them. So all you do is pick one, but there's 3 sentence stems we can use when we write a response. You can either start with, I thought, and then you tell me what you thought about the story. Another sentence stem you could say is, it was interesting when, and then you're going to tell me what was interesting about something you read. And then the last one is, blank made me think of ... Okay, so when you respond to your text for your assignment, you're going to choose one of these thinking stems and you're going to use it to help tell me your response to the story we've been reading all week, Room to Grow. Now, remember, Miss Waldie told you, I don't want you to just write, I thought it was a good story. I don't want you to put that, right? Or I thought it was cool, right? Or I don't want to hear that, because the reason is, boys and girls, we're 3rd graders now and our thinking needs to be deeper, right? So we need to think of a juicy response is what I'm going to call it, because I want a lot of flavor in your response. Think of who's ever had a really good steak, right? It's nice and juicy, it's flavorful, right? That's the same way I want your sentences, guys. I want it nice and juicy. I want you to tell me deeper of what you're thinking, not just, I thought it was a cool story, right? Because that's not telling me much, right? So Miss Waldie's gonna practice a response to this story I just wrote. And I'm gonna use this last thinking stem. Blank made me think of, okay? So I'm gonna start with the story, and it's called Faith Ringgold. Ringgold made me think of the time I watched my abuelita sew things. Each thing she made was detailed and beautiful. So do you see how Miss Waldie's response to that story we wrote was, you know, I had a lot of detail. I didn't just say, it made me think of my abuelita, right? Do you see how I gave you a little bit more detail? I said, you know what? This story reminded me of the time I used to watch my abuelita make her own. She would make like booties and hats, and not like booties, but like they're like little shoe booties. But I would watch her make all kinds of things, and she would always give away everything she made. She would never sell it. She would just give it away because she just loved to do it. So that's something it reminded me of, right? So what you guys are gonna do for your assignment, first you need to read the story again, Room to Grow. You're gonna read that story again. And as you're reading it this time, boys and girls, I want you to be thinking, what's the response you're gonna make to the story? Maybe what does it make you think of, or what did it teach you, or what did it remind you of? Remember, Miss Waldie put some thinking stems. So I'm gonna share my screen and show you the assignment. when you go to our Google Classroom, it's gonna look like this, okay? So the title is responding to the text, and I put, after reading the story Room to Grow, write a response based on what you have learned. Here are some sentence stems you could use. Make sure to include text evidence. So you can either use I thought, it was interesting when, or blank made me think of. Whichever one you choose, do not type it in this box, okay? You're gonna click down here and you're gonna type it, and you could say, I thought, and then you can tell me exactly what you thought, or it was interesting when, and then you gotta tell me what happened that made it interesting, okay? Does anyone have questions over what we're gonna